Ma'am, step out of line, please.
Is there a problem? May I ask what triggered the additional screening?
Routine procedure. What kind of business?
Is that information required for this screening? Please document why I was selected.
You do not tell me what to record.
I want a supervisor present before we continue.
You want additional review? You will get it.
Ma'am, step out of line, please. The words cut through the morning noise at Atlanta's International Airport, just as Dr. Simone Carter reached for the gray plastic, been holding her shoes, laptop, and leather handbag. She stopped. Around her, suitcase wheels rattled across tile, trays knocked against metal rails, and an overhead announcement dissolved beneath the restless hum of hundreds of travelers trying to make their flights. Simone glanced at the screening monitor. A green indicator had appeared beside her cleared bag. Her boarding pass had already been checked. Nothing had beeped. Nothing had been flagged that she could see. Still, Supervisory Screening Officer Mark Whitaker stood 6 feet away, with one hand resting beside the conveyor controls and the other pointing toward the secondary screening area. Is there a problem? Simone asked. Her voice was calm. Whitaker looked at her boarding pass, then at her face. Additional screening. Simone slipped her feet into her shoes and gathered her belongings without argument. She had traveled enough to know that additional screening could happen. What caught her attention was the younger officer beside Whitaker, Daniel Reed, staring at the monitor with a faint crease between his eyebrows. She already cleared, Daniel said quietly. Whitaker did not look at him. He reached toward the workstation and entered something into the system. I said, pull her aside. The sentence was low, almost swallowed by the conveyor belt, but Simone heard every word. She looked at the digital clock above the checkpoint. 8:17 a.m. She stored the time in her memory. Then she followed Whitaker to a stainless steel table separated from the main line by a waist-high divider. Travelers streamed past only a few feet away. A businessman hurried by while fastening his belt. A mother guided 2 sleepy children toward the concourse. Nobody stopped. Nobody needed to. To them, Simone was simply another passenger receiving extra screening. Whitaker pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. Place your bag here. Simone set down the handbag. May I ask what triggered the additional screening? His eyes remained on the zipper. Routine procedure. Of course. She waited a beat. I'm asking what triggered this one. That made him look up. Simone was 39, dressed in navy slacks, a cream blouse, and a charcoal travel coat folded over her arm. Nothing about her posture was confrontational. Her hands remained visible. Her expression remained composed. It's something in Whitaker's face tightened, as though the question itself had crossed an invisible line. I don't need to explain the process to you, he said. Simone felt warmth rise beneath her collar, but she refused to let irritation choose her next words. She had learned long ago that calm was not surrender. Sometimes calm was how you noticed what anger would make you miss. Understood, she said. Whitaker opened the handbag and began examining its contents. Daniel remained near the workstation, glancing once at Simone and then back at the screen. His expression had changed. Not alarm. Uncertainty. Simone noticed that too. Whitaker removed her laptop and placed it on the table. Where are you traveling? Washington, D.C. Purpose? Simone paused. That question sounded ordinary enough, but his tone had shifted from screening to interrogation. Business? What kind of business? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Simone looked past him toward the security camera mounted above the checkpoint, its dark glass lens angled directly toward them. Then she looked again at the clock. 8:19. 2 minutes had passed since Whitaker made his decision. 2 minutes, Simone thought, could disappear easily unless somebody remembered them. She did. Before we continue, if you enjoy powerful stories that reveal the strength of a human spirit and the choices that shape our lives, subscribe to Narralight. Every story has a lesson. Every choice has a consequence. And sometimes the smallest moment changes everything. Now, let's see what happens next. Business, Simone repeated, keeping her eyes on Whitaker. He waited as if the single word were incomplete. What kind of business? He asked again. Behind them, another gray bin struck the end of the conveyor with a hollow clatter. Simone could hear the impatience of travelers being reminded to collect their belongings. And keep moving. She glanced toward the concourse, where the morning crowd flowed steadily beneath bright departure screens. A professional meeting, she said. Whitaker studied her for a moment before turning back to the handbag. Who are you meeting? Simone felt the question settled differently. She had answered where she was going. She had answered why. Now he wanted names. Is that information required for this screening? She asked. Whitaker stopped moving. Daniel Reed looked up from the workstation. For half a second, nobody spoke. I'm asking the questions, Whitaker said. Simone breathed slowly through her nose. The air smelled faintly of coffee from somewhere beyond security, mixed with the sterile scent of recently cleaned floors. She reminded herself that her flight was still manageable. She reminded herself that cooperation did not require abandoning reasonable questions. And I am cooperating, she said. I would simply like to understand what information is required. Whitaker zipped one compartment closed and opened another. People who cooperate do not make this difficult. There it was. Not an accusation exactly. Something more subtle. A suggestion that asking for clarity was itself a problem. Simone looked at him steadily. I'm not making it difficult. I am asking you to document it. Daniel's fingers stopped above the keyboard. Whitaker slowly raised his head. Document what? The reason for the additional screening. The time it began. Any questions or additional steps you believe are necessary. Her tone never rose. I would also like your supervisor's name and the reference number associated with this screening. A family passed behind her, talking about breakfast. Somewhere farther down the checkpoint, someone laughed. The ordinary sounds made the stillness around Simone's table feel sharper. Whitaker's jaw tightened. You seem very familiar with procedures. I travel. A lot. Enough. For work? Simone watched him carefully. The questions were moving again. Not toward an object in her bag. Not toward anything that had appeared on the scanner. Toward her. Officer Whitaker, Daniel said quietly. Whitaker turned. What? Daniel nodded toward the monitor. The original screening is showing complete. Whitaker stepped closer to the workstation. Simone could not see the screen from where she stood, but she saw Daniel point to something near its lower corner. Whitaker leaned in, read it, then straightened. I know what it says. Daniel lowered his voice. Then what should I enter for the secondary referral? Whitaker stared at him. A radio crackled nearby. Simone looked at the clock. 8:23. 6 minutes. She committed that time to memory too. Whitaker walked back to her table and placed the laptop beside her handbag. Do you always question security personnel this much? Only when I'm trying to understand what is happening. Maybe that is your problem. Simone felt the words land, but she gave him nothing back except silence. She had spent years learning that silence could reveal more than confrontation. People often rush to fill it. Whitaker did. You were selected for additional screening. That is all you need to know. Then please record that as the reason. His expression hardened. You do not tell me what to record. No, Simone said softly. The facts do. Daniel looked down immediately, but not before Simone caught the flicker in his eyes. Whitaker pulled the handbag toward himself again, although every compartment had already been examined. He checked the same interior pocket a second time. Simone noticed. Daniel noticed too. Then Whitaker turned toward the workstation. Daniel, update the referral. Daniel stared at the screen. With what reason? Whitaker did not answer immediately. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Simone looked at the camera above his shoulder, then at the digital clock changing to 8:24. When Whitaker finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that Simone had to concentrate to hear him. I will tell you what to put. Daniel's hands remained motionless above the keyboard. Daniel did not type. The cursor blinked inside the empty referral field, appearing and disappearing with mechanical patience. Whitaker stood beside him, one hand resting on the edge of the workstation. Enter behavioral concern, he said. Daniel looked at the screen, then toward Simone. What behavior? The question was quiet, almost careful. Whitaker turned his head. Excuse me. Daniel swallowed. I mean, what behavior should I document? Simone remained beside the stainless steel table, her charcoal coat folded across one arm. She had asked questions. She had requested documentation. She had raised neither her voice nor her hands. Even now, with minutes disappearing from her morning, she stood exactly where she had been instructed to stand. Whitaker glanced toward her. Unusual questioning. Evasive answers. Resistance to screening. Simone felt something cold move through her chest. Not fear. Recognition. She was hearing an ordinary conversation being rewritten while she was still standing inside it. I answered every required question you asked, she said. Whitaker faced her. You avoided telling me who you were meeting, because I asked whether that information was required. That is evasive. Then please include my exact response. Whitaker's expression changed by a fraction. This is not a courtroom. I did not say it was. then stop treating it like one. Simone glanced at the clock. 8:26. 9 minutes since he had ordered her out of line. 9 minutes was not much in an airport until a gate changed, a train was delayed, or boarding began without you. She looked back at Daniel. Please do not summarize my words inaccurately. Whitaker stepped between her and the workstation, blocking her view. You do not direct my staff. I am directing my request to the person creating a record about me. Daniel's eyes dropped to the keyboard. Whitaker lowered his voice. You seem determined to turn routine screening into something bigger. Simone considered that sentence before answering. I'm trying to keep it exactly what it is. The radio clipped to Whitaker's uniform released a burst of static. Another officer called for assistance several lanes away. For a moment, Whitaker watched the crowd moving through the checkpoint, and Simone saw how comfortable he looked inside the machinery of the place. Travelers followed arrows. Shoes went into bins. Bags went through scanners. Instructions were given and obeyed. Everything moved because most people understood that stopping could cost them a flight. Whitaker turned back. Open the laptop. Simone did. Unlock it. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. For what screening purpose? His mouth tightened. There you go again. I'm asking what you are requesting access to. Daniel looked up sharply. Officer Whitaker. Her electronics already cleared the scanner. Whitaker ignored him. Ma'am, if you continue complicating this process, you're going to be here longer. The words were spoken evenly, but Simone heard what lived underneath them. Time had become leverage. She closed the laptop without entering her password. Then I would like a supervisor present before any request for access beyond the physical screening. A silence opened between them. Whitaker stared at her. Daniel slowly removed his hands from the keyboard. Simone could hear the distant boarding announcements from the concourse, each one reminding her that the airport continued moving even when she could not. Fine, Whitaker said at last. You want additional review? You will get additional review. He reached for a desk phone and pressed a button. We need a private screening room. Daniel's head lifted. Is that necessary? Whitaker gave him a look that ended the question. Simone checked the clock again. 8:29. Whitaker returned the receiver to its cradle. Gather your belongings. Simone placed the laptop inside her bag and folded her coat over it. Her pulse had quickened, but her movements stayed measured. As Whitaker turned toward the corridor, Daniel looked once at the referral field still glowing on his monitor. Behavioral concern remained typed there, waiting to become permanent. Whitaker called over his shoulder. Save it. Daniel stared at the words for another second. Then, instead of pressing save, he quietly opened the system history. The corridor beyond the checkpoint was quieter, but not silent. The noise of the terminal followed Simone through the walls as a muted vibration of rolling luggage, distant announcements, and conversations moving toward gates she could no longer see. Whitaker walked several steps ahead, carrying himself with the brisk certainty of someone who expected to be followed. Simone followed because she had been instructed to, not because she had stopped questioning what was happening. Her handbag rested against her side. Her charcoal coat remained folded over her arm. At the end of the corridor, Whitaker opened a door marked for private screening and gestured inside. The room was small and brightly lit, with pale walls, a metal table, 3 chairs, and a clock mounted above the door. Simone looked at it immediately. 8:31. Place your belongings on the table, Whitaker said. Simone set down her handbag and coat. Before we continue, I would like the supervisor I requested. Someone will come. Thank you. May I have your full name and identification number for my records? Whitaker gave a short breath through his nose. You can request that information later. I am requesting it now. He stared at her. Simone held his gaze without challenging it. She had discovered something important during the walk from the checkpoint. Whitaker seemed comfortable when she was moving where he directed. Questions disrupted that comfort. Specific questions disrupted it even more. Mark Whitaker, he finally said. Supervisory screening officer. And your identification number? That will be available through the complaint process if you decide to file one. Simone nodded once. Then please note that I requested it at approximately 8:31 this morning. His expression sharpened. You are keeping time? Yes. Why? Because time is part of what happened. For the first time, Whitaker had no immediate answer. The fluorescent fixture above them produced a steady electrical hum. Simone could hear the second hand of the wall clock clicking forward. Whitaker opened a folder on the table and looked down at a form. You were referred because of behavioral concerns during screening. There it was. The new explanation. Simone remembered Daniel asking what behavior he was supposed to document. She remembered Whitaker saying unusual questioning, evasive answers, resistance. She remembered the green indicator before any of those things had happened. That was not the reason given when you removed me from the line, she said. Whitaker looked up. Circumstances develop. At 8:17, I had not asked you any questions. Silence. You told Officer Reed to pull me aside before I asked why. Whitaker closed the folder. Are you accusing me of something? I am establishing the sequence. You are making assumptions about a process you do not understand. Simone felt her heartbeat against the base of her throat, but her voice stayed level. Then the record should clarify it. Whitaker leaned back slightly. What exactly do you want? Simone looked at the form between them. I want the original reason for the referral preserved. I want the time recorded accurately. I want the questions you asked documented accurately. And if you're changing the reason now, I want that change recorded too. Whitaker's eyes remained fixed on her. The room suddenly seemed smaller. You do not get to dictate an official report. I'm not asking to dictate it. Simone paused. I'm asking you not to rewrite it. The clock clicked once. Twice. Whitaker looked toward the door, then back at Simone. Careful. The word came softly. Simone did not move. About what? Another pause. About turning a routine situation into an allegation. Simone looked at the closed folder. I have not made an allegation. Her eyes returned to his. I have asked for an accurate record. Outside the room, footsteps approached and then passed. Whitaker opened the folder again, picked up a pen, and began writing. Simone watched his hand move across the page. What are you recording? She asked. He stopped. My assessment. Then put my request in writing too. Whitaker slowly placed the pen down. At the checkpoint, several yards away and separated by two secure doors, Daniel Reed stared at the system history on his monitor. The original clearance timestamp was still there. So was the manually initiated secondary referral, entered seconds later. Daniel moved the cursor over the audit menu and selected Preserve Activity History. A confirmation appeared. He read it twice before clicking Confirm. Back in the private room, Simone looked at the clock. 8:34. Whitaker did not know that somewhere behind him, the record he seemed so determined to. Control had just become much harder to change. Before we continue, if you enjoy inspiring stories about courage, second chances, and people who choose kindness when it matters most, subscribe to Narralight. Our stories remind us that one decision, one voice, or one act of compassion can change a life forever. Now, let's see what happened next. At 8:36, Whitaker placed the pen beside the folder and pushed his chair back. We're going to complete the screening now. Simone remained seated. With the supervisor present, the supervisor has been notified. Then I will wait. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. You are delaying yourself. Simone looked at the clock above the door. I requested a supervisor 5 minutes ago, and someone will come when available. He pointed toward her handbag. Until then, open your laptop. Simone did not reach for it. You already asked me to unlock it at the checkpoint. I asked what access you were requesting and why. I still have not received an answer. Whitaker folded his arms. Your continued refusal is becoming part of the concern. I have not refused screening. You refused an instruction. I asked for clarification. You keep changing the words. Simone looked at him for a long second. No, I'm trying to keep the words from changing. The fluorescent hum seemed louder after that. Whitaker turned toward the door, opened it, and spoke quietly to someone in the corridor. Simone could not make out every word, but she heard delayed, uncooperative, and additional review. When he returned, his expression had settled into something colder than irritation. Your flight boards soon, correct? Simone glanced at the clock. Yes. Then I suggest you stop making this harder than it needs to be. There was again. Time, offered like a bargain. Cooperation had slowly been redefined to mean accepting whatever explanation came next. Simone rested both hands on the edge of the metal table. Are you saying my ability to make my flight depends on whether I stop asking for documentation? Whitaker stared at her. I did not say that. Good. She nodded toward the folder. Then please make sure the record does not suggest it. His face tightened. He picked up the pen again. You know what I think? I would prefer the documented reason for my screening. I think you came into this looking for a confrontation. Simone felt the accusation press against the room, but she refused to carry it for him. At 8:17, I was collecting my shoes. Whitaker said nothing. You selected me before I spoke to you. At 8:23, Officer Reed told you my original screening showed complete. At 8:26, you described my questions as behavioral concerns. At 8:29, you requested this room after I asked for a supervisor. She looked at the clock. It is now 8:38. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Whitaker's expression. Simone had not been taking notes. She had not touched her phone, yet she had preserved the morning minute by minute. "You have been memorizing everything?" he asked. "I have been paying attention." Whitaker closed the folder harder than necessary, but the sound was only a flat clap against the metal table. "Stay here." He walked out and shut the door. Simone was alone. She released a breath she had been holding and looked down at her hands. They were steady, but only because she was making them steady. Beyond the wall, the airport continued without her. At the checkpoint, Daniel Reed was reading the preserved activity history when a new administrative prompt appeared on his screen. It requested a modification to the secondary referral narrative. He opened the request. The proposed wording stated that the passenger had displayed concerning behavior before additional screening was initiated. Daniel read the sentence once. Then again, he looked at the timestamps. Initial screening cleared, 8:16. Manual secondary referral, 8:17. Passenger interaction notes, entered later. The sequence did not match the new wording. Daniel glanced toward the corridor where Simone had disappeared. Then he selected the option marked Retain Original Audit History. A warning asked whether he was certain. Daniel clicked yes. Another message appeared almost immediately. The preserved record had triggered an automated integrity notification for supervisory review. Daniel stared at the screen, his heartbeat suddenly louder in his ears. He had expected the system to save the history. He had not expected anyone else to see it so quickly. Then a phone rang at the supervisory station. An officer answered, listened for several seconds, and looked across the checkpoint toward Daniel. "Reed," she called. "Do not change anything on that terminal." Daniel slowly removed his hands from the keyboard. "Who is asking?" The officer covered the receiver and looked toward the secured corridor. "Compliance review." In the private room, Simone watched the clock change to 8:40. She still believed she was waiting for Whitaker's supervisor. She had no idea that the conversation outside had already begun to move far beyond him. At 8:41, Simone sat alone beneath the fluorescent light and listened to the smallest sounds in the room. The ventilation system breathed through a narrow ceiling vent. A clock clicked above the door. Somewhere beyond the wall, a cart rolled across tile and faded into the distance. For 24 minutes, she had measured this morning through questions, timestamps, and careful answers. Now, there was nothing to answer, nothing to document, only waiting. She looked at her handbag on the metal table. Her phone was inside, silent and unreachable without reopening the bag. She knew her boarding time was approaching. She pictured the departure screen at the gate, the orderly lines forming beneath numbered groups, travelers checking watches while the aircraft waited beyond the glass. She could almost hear the announcement. Simone closed her eyes for 3 seconds, then opened them again. She would not let urgency turn into panic. That was what pressure did. It narrowed choices until the easiest escape began to feel like the only one. She thought about Whitaker telling her that people who cooperated did not make things difficult. She thought about his warning that she might remain there longer. She thought about how quickly an ordinary question had become behavioral concern. The words bothered her more than the room. Words could become records. Records could become explanations. Explanations could survive long after the people involved had forgotten the exact moment. Simone looked at the clock. 8:43. She whispered the time once, barely audible. 8:43. Not because she feared forgetting it, but because saying it made the moment real. Outside, Daniel Reed stood beside the supervisory workstation while a woman named Karen Mitchell reviewed the preserved audit history. Karen had managed checkpoint operations for 11 years, and her expression changed as she moved through the timestamps. "Who initiated the secondary referral?" she asked. "Officer Whitaker," Daniel answered. "At 8:17? Yes." Karen scrolled farther. "And when did the behavioral concern get entered?" Daniel pointed. After she asked why she had been selected. Karen stopped scrolling. "Was there a concern before the referral?" Daniel hesitated. The checkpoint moved around them, busy and indifferent. "Not that I observed." Karen looked directly at him. "I need what you observed, not what you think someone wants you to say." Daniel took a breath. She cleared. "Officer Whitaker told me to pull her aside." She asked why. She stayed calm. "Later, he told me to enter behavioral concern." Karen looked back at the screen. "Did you?" "I started the entry, but I did not save it." "Why not?" "Because I could not identify behavior that supported it." Karen nodded slowly. Then she noticed the modification request. "Who submitted this?" Daniel did not need to answer. Whitaker's identification appeared beside the request. Karen reached for the telephone. Before she could dial, another line illuminated. She answered. Mitchell. Her posture changed almost immediately. Yes, I have the audit history in front of me. Daniel watched her listen. Understood. Nothing will be modified. She ended the call and looked toward the secured corridor. Where is the passenger? Private screening room, 2. Karen checked the clock. How long? About 12 minutes in the room. Longer since the referral. Karen's expression tightened. Has the requested supervisor spoken with her? Daniel shook his head. Karen picked up the telephone again. Then we correct that first. Inside the room, Simone heard footsteps stop outside. She straightened in her chair. The handle moved, but the door did not open. Immediately, voices murmured beyond it. One belonged to Whitaker. The other was a woman Simone had not heard before. I can explain the referral, Whitaker said. You will have that opportunity, the woman replied. But you're not going back in there alone. Silence followed. Simone looked at the clock. 8:46. The door finally opened. Karen Mitchell entered first. Whitaker stood behind her, no longer leading the conversation. Karen closed the door halfway and faced Simone. Miss Carter, my name is Karen Mitchell. I am the checkpoint operations manager. I understand you requested a supervisor. Simone stood. Yes. 15 minutes ago. Karen glanced at the clock, then back at her. I see that. There was no defensiveness in her voice, only recognition. Before anything else continues, I want you to know that your original screening record has been preserved. Simone's eyes shifted toward Whitaker. For the first time that morning, his gaze moved away from hers. Karen continued. There are questions about how this referral was documented, and those questions are being reviewed now. Simone felt the pressure in her chest loosen slightly, but she did not mistake review for resolution. Am I still being screened? Karen was about to answer when a knock sounded against the open door. An airport administrator stood outside, holding a telephone. Ms. Mitchell, he said, the Department of Homeland Security Oversight Office is asking that nobody close this review until their representative arrives. The room went completely still. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The airport administrator remained at the doorway with the telephone in his hand while the fluorescent light cast a pale reflection across the metal table. Simone looked from Karen Mitchell to Mark Whitaker. Something had changed. Not loudly. No alarms. No dramatic orders. Just a subtle transfer of attention that Whitaker seemed to recognize before anyone explained it. Homeland Security? He asked. Karen turned toward him. Oversight. Whitaker straightened. This is a routine passenger screening. I can explain what happened. A woman's voice came from the corridor before Karen could answer. Then you will have an opportunity to explain it. The woman who entered appeared to be in her early 40s, wearing a dark blue suit and carrying a slim leather portfolio. She introduced herself as Elena Brooks, an investigator assigned to an oversight review. She greeted Karen first, then Daniel Reed, who had followed her from the checkpoint. Finally, she looked at Simone. Ms. Carter, I understand you have been waiting. Simone glanced at the clock. 8:49, since 8:17. Elena nodded once. That matches the system timeline. Whitaker stepped forward. The passenger demonstrated behavior that required additional review. Elena did not look at him immediately. She opened her portfolio and removed a printed sheet. What behavior occurred before 8:17? Whitaker paused. The concern developed during the interaction. Elena raised her eyes. Then why was the secondary referral initiated before the interaction? Silence filled the room. Whitaker looked toward Daniel. Daniel remained near the door, hands at his sides. There were indicators, Whitaker said. Which indicators? Elena asked. Professional judgment. Documented where? Another pause. Simone watched without satisfaction. She had spent the morning trying to make the sequence visible. Now someone else was asking the same questions. Only the balance of authority had changed. Whitaker cleared his throat. If everyone would allow me to explain the passenger's conduct after she was selected, the context will make sense. Elena closed the portfolio. Mr. Whitaker, we are not here for her. The sentence landed softly. That made it heavier. Whitaker's expression emptied. Elena continued. This review did not begin this morning. Simone looked at her. Karen did too. Our office has been examining a series of irregular secondary screening referrals associated with this checkpoint, Elena said. The concern is not that additional screening occurs. The concern is whether individual referrals were initiated for legitimate reasons and whether records were later altered to justify decisions already made. Whitaker's face tightened. Are you accusing me of falsifying records? I'm telling you what is being reviewed. Elena turned toward Daniel. Officer Reed preserved the original audit history before modification could replace the initial sequence. Daniel looked uncomfortable with the attention. I just did not want the timestamps changed. Elena nodded. That matters. She placed the printed sheet on the table. At 8:16, Ms. Carter's initial screening cleared. At 8:17, a manual secondary referral was created. Later, behavioral language was proposed as justification. The audit history preserved both events. Simone looked at the page, but did not touch it. So, my questions were not the reason I was pulled aside. According to the timeline, Elena said they could not have been. They happened afterward. Whitaker looked toward Karen. There are details being taken out of context. Karen's response was measured. Then the preserved record will give you the opportunity to provide that context. Elena turned to Simone. For clarity, this review concerns the decisions and documentation of specific individuals. It is not a conclusion about everyone working at this checkpoint. Simone nodded. Daniel had already made that distinction clear through his own choice. He had seen something that did not match the record, and instead of looking away, he had preserved it. Elena looked at Whitaker again. Until the review is complete, you will step away from screening duties and preserve all relevant records. Whitaker opened his mouth, then stopped. For the first time since 8:17, he had nothing to direct. Simone looked at the clock. 8:52. 35 minutes had passed. Elena turned toward her. Ms. Carter, your screening is complete. We can arrange assistance getting you to your gate. Simone picked up her coat, but left her handbag on the table for one more second. I have one question. Elena waited. Simone looked at Whitaker. Will the record say what actually happened? Elena answered without hesitation. The original record is preserved. Simone lifted her back. She had not needed a secret title, an influential name, or special treatment. She had needed the truth to remain where someone could find it. As Karen opened the door, the sounds of the airport rushed back into the room, and for the first time that morning, Simone was free to walk toward them. The secure door opened into the corridor, and Simone stepped back into the movement of the airport with Karen Mitchell beside her. The change was almost disorienting. Travelers hurried toward trains and gates. Coffee cups balanced on rolling suitcases. Departure announcements echoed beneath the high ceiling as if the last 35 minutes had never happened. Simone looked at the nearest clock. 8:53. What time does boarding begin? Karen asked. 9 o'clock. Karen immediately lifted her radio. I need passenger assistance from the checkpoint to Concourse D. Time sensitive. Simone adjusted the strap of her handbag. I can walk. I know, Karen said. But you should not miss your flight because we kept you here. The word we mattered. Karen did not pretend nothing had happened, and she did not hide behind procedure. Simone nodded. Behind them, Elena Brooks remained near the private screening room with Daniel Reed and Whitaker. Elena placed a document on the metal table. Mr. Whitaker, your screening access will be temporarily reassigned while the records are reviewed. Whitaker looked toward the corridor where Simone had disappeared. I was doing my job. Elena's expression remained neutral. That is what the review will determine. She challenged every instruction. Daniel spoke before he could reconsider. She asked questions. Whitaker turned toward him. Daniel swallowed, but continued. Those are not the same thing. The room fell quiet. Elena looked at Daniel for a moment, then at the preserved audit history. No, she said. They are not. Whitaker lowered his eyes. The authority he had carried so easily that morning had not vanished. It had simply returned to its proper boundary. Outside, an airport employee arrived with an electric cart. Simone climbed aboard beside Karen, and they moved through the terminal beneath rows of bright signs. The cart passed restaurants opening for the breakfast rush, families studying gate numbers, and travelers standing beneath charging stations with phones in their hands. Simone watched them quietly. Ms. Carter, Karen said, I owe you an apology for how long it took for your request to reach me. Simone turned toward her. Thank you for saying that. You should have received supervisory review sooner. Yes, Simone said. There was no bitterness in the word, only truth. Karen nodded. You will receive information about the complaint and review process. Your account matters. Simone looked ahead as the cart turned toward Concourse D. I will provide it. Back at the checkpoint, Elena asked Daniel to describe the morning from the beginning. He did not exaggerate. He did not speculate about Whitaker's motives. He simply gave the sequence, the clearance, the manual referral, Simone's questions, the proposed behavioral entry, and the request to modify the narrative. Facts, one after another. That restraint gave them weight. Elena closed her portfolio. You did the right thing preserving the original record. Daniel looked toward the busy lanes. I almost saved what he told me to write. But you did not. I was worried about challenging a supervisor. Elena considered him carefully. Doing the right thing does not always feel powerful when you're doing it. Daniel nodded. At 8:58, Simone's cart reached the entrance to her gate. Passengers were already gathering near the boarding lanes. She stepped down and thanked Karen. Then a voice called from behind. Ms. Carter. Simone turned. Elena had caught up, slightly out of breath but composed. I wanted you to have this before you boarded. She handed Simone a reference card containing the review information. Your statement can be added directly to the preserved record. Simone accepted it. Thank you. Elena hesitated. I'm sorry this happened. Simone looked at the card, then back at her. I was not asking to be special. Elena waited. I was asking to be treated the same. The boarding announcement began overhead. Karen lowered her gaze for a moment. Elena nodded slowly. No one tried to improve Simone's sentence because nothing needed improving. She turned toward the gate as the first passengers began moving forward. Behind her, the review would continue through records, timestamps, interviews, and individual decisions. Whatever consequences followed would belong to the choices that caused them, just as Daniel's decision to preserve the truth belonged to him. Simone joined the boarding line and finally allowed herself a full breath. She had not won because someone more powerful had arrived to make her important. She had mattered before anyone opened that door. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to Narralight for more powerful stories that remind us to look beyond appearances, challenge prejudice, and never underestimate the impact of doing what's right. Because sometimes the smallest act of courage creates the biggest change. Thank you for watching. Remember, the world changes one choice at a time. We'll see you in the next story. At 9:02, Simone Carter handed her boarding pass to the gate agent and walked down the jet bridge with the other passengers. The sounds of the terminal softened behind her. Ahead, the aircraft doorway stood open beneath warm cabin lights. And for the first time since 8:17 that morning, nobody was asking her to step aside. She found her seat beside the window, placed her handbag beneath the seat in front of her, and folded her charcoal coat across her lap. Outside, baggage carts moved beneath the wings while ground crews prepared the aircraft for departure. Simone took out her phone. Several notifications filled the screen, but she ignored them. Instead, she opened a blank note and typed the first thing that mattered. 8:17 a.m. Manual secondary screening began after initial clearance. She continued slowly. 8:23. Original screening confirmed complete. 8:29. Requested supervisor and was moved to private screening. 8:46. Supervisor arrived. 8:49. Oversight investigator entered. She stopped and looked at the timestamps. Less than 40 minutes separated the woman collecting her shoes from the woman now sitting safely aboard her flight. Yet those minutes felt larger than the entire morning. Simone added names while they remained fresh in her memory. Mark Whitaker, Daniel Reed, Karen Mitchell, Elena Brooks. Then she wrote only what she had seen and heard. No guesses, no assumptions, no attempt to make the story more dramatic than the facts already made it. Across the aisle, father helped his young daughter fasten her seatbelt. 2 rows ahead, someone struggled to fit a suitcase into the overhead compartment and laughed when another passenger offered a hand. Ordinary kindness moved quietly through the cabin. Simone watched it for a moment. Her phone vibrated. An electronic message confirmed that a review reference had been opened and that she could submit her account through the official process. She read it twice, then saved the number. Back at the checkpoint, the morning rush continued. Daniel Reed stood at a station beneath the same fluorescent lights, but something felt different now. A new supervisor had taken responsibility for the lane while Karen assisted with the review. Travelers still placed shoes and electronics into gray bins. Screens still flashed. Radios still crackled. The system had not transformed because one employee made a good choice or another faced scrutiny. It simply had a record now, and records could be examined. Daniel glanced at the monitor where the preserved audit notice remained visible. He remembered how close his finger had come to saving words he could not support. It had seemed like a small decision at the time. One click, one sentence, one easier morning. Instead, he had stopped. On the aircraft, Simone returned her note. At the bottom, she typed one final sentence. I requested equal treatment and an accurate record. She read it once and pressed save. The cabin door closed. A flight attendant welcomed everyone aboard and asked passengers to prepare for departure. Simone switched her phone to airplane mode and rested it face down on her lap. Outside the window, sunlight stretched across the runway in long bands of gold. The aircraft eased away from the gate. As the terminal slowly passed beyond the glass, Simone thought again about 8:17. That minute had mattered because someone had made a choice. So had 8:23. So had Daniel's decision not to save an unsupported explanation. So had Karen's decision to listen. So had Elena's decision to follow the record instead of defending an assumption. Institutions were filled with people, and people made choices. Some choices misused authority. Others protected fairness. Responsibility belonged to the person who chose, just as courage belonged to the person who refused to look away. The aircraft turned toward the runway. Simone leaned back and released a slow breath. She did not feel victorious. Victory suggested that dignity had been something she needed to win back. It had never left her. The engines deepened into a steady hum, and the plane began moving forward. Simone watched the airport grow smaller beneath a clear Georgia morning. Her hands rested quietly over the folded coat on her lap. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to say. Somewhere behind her, the preserved record remained. Somewhere ahead, Washington waited. And between those two places was the simple truth she had protected from the beginning. Fairness should never depend on how important someone appears to be.